Welcome to the first episode of a new weekly public affairs commentary series called This Is Who We Are. My name is Steve Greenfield. This is not the first episode as I had initially conceived it, but things I and many others have been talking about for years in other settings have suddenly burst into plain view. Things that were long en route are now here. That transition gave rise to the name of this series, as it immediately provoked a response from the incoming president and establishment leaders from both sides of the red-blue divide that this is not who we are, and if we unite and heal, all will be well. With that, they are doomed to fail. If the problem is not properly identified, it most assuredly cannot be solved. We have failed to solve it from 1775 through today, with no end in sight other than by medical, environmental, social, or nuclear catastrophe. This is who we are. It's who we've always been. It's not by accident or a divergence of values over the passage of time. It's by design. It was built into the Constitution deliberately. And so this series is called This Is Who We Are. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Steve Greenfield. I live in New Paltz, New York for 20 years, and I was born and raised in a blue-collar New York family that traveled the traditional road over 4 generations from immigrants on the Lower East Side to the South Bronx to South Queens on the shore of Jamaica Bay, and now to points beyond. I graduated from Columbia in 1982 with a degree in economics and have earned my meager livelihood at home and abroad as a musician, although that's currently on hold until performance venues can reopen. I've been a volunteer firefighter for the last 17 years and was elected to 2 terms on the local school board, which I still serve in an appointed legislative advocacy role. I've been a public interest organizer and advocate my entire life and have several years of radio commentary experience at WKNY in Kingston, New York, hosted by community radio pioneer Jimmy Buff, and podcast commentary with Albany's Cynthia Pooler, which led to this opportunity to contribute to the Pacifica Affiliates Network. I'm grateful to Ursula Rudenberg for making this platform available. So let's get back to today's program. You're listening to This Is Who We Are on the Pacific Affiliates Network with your host, Steve Greenfield. Yes, this is who we are. Let's get under the hood of that, since we're all actually taught this in school. Maybe shrugged it off in the general, but when am I going to use this in real life process? Well, it turns out we need to use it in real life and right now. There was no presumption from 1775 through 1789 that separation from Britain would produce one big country, or perhaps 13 small ones, or something else in between. We ended up settling for 2 countries, awkwardly grafted around free trade and mutual defense agreements. The 2 halves had 2 different systems of government, 2 types of economies, 2 different sets of values. Provisions were made to ensure that this would never be altered by majority vote. Quite the contrary. Low population, feudal agrarian states were given considerable additional power as inducement to approve the Constitution, which launched the American experiment with a series of slave-owning Southerners as presidents and no democratic mechanism by which slavery could end. All of those minority rule provisions, except for the 3/5 compromise, remain in effect today, with those in the minority as dedicated to preserving them as ever, and presidents without majority votes taking office as recently as 1993, 1997, 2001, and 2017. This is who we are. So what about anti-majority violence? Unprecedented? It's not even unprecedented over the last few months when armed insurrectionists invaded state houses and governors' residences in Michigan, Oregon, state of Washington, to the cheers of Trump and his allies in politics and media. Every single time in our history in which the original setup has been perceived as under threat by majority vote, from Shays' Rebellion in 1786 to the 3 years of the Whiskey Rebellion after the Constitution, starting in 1791 through 1794, to Bloody Kansas from 1754 through the start of the Civil War, to the Civil War, to the ending of Reconstruction in 1876 as a result of the contested election that Rutherford B. Hayes eventually conceded the removal of federal troops in order to get that election resolved and himself installed in office, through the next 90 years of Klan terror, to the use of federal troops to integrate schools, to Oklahoma City, to last week at the U.S. Capitol. Violence has always been the tool of choice, and it almost always has been successful in achieving its aims, because as Martin Luther King wrote in a letter from a Birmingham jail, power, no matter how socially liberal, always prefers the speediest possible return to order over justice. None of this should be surprising in a country that teaches every generation that our nation was forged by the skill and dedication and determination of the individually armed white male Christian citizen, overthrowing a mighty empire, conquering Mexico, and gradually exterminating the native population in his inexorable, manifest destiny march to the Pacific and triumph as the basic building block of the greatest nation in history. This is the mandated history curriculum of every public school system in America. When we see millions of Americans identifying with this tradition as their core value and acting upon it, how can we blame them? How can we act surprised? They weren't born that way. As the song from South Pacific says, they had to be carefully taught. And it's taught everywhere, to everyone, not just in conservative strongholds or mostly white Christian regions. What's harder to understand is how any of us end up not identifying with it and not acting upon it. For generating such people is certainly not the design of our education and socialization systems or our mass media. Quite the contrary, their design is to produce people who think and act that way. So is there any hope to get out of this? Maybe, but only if the people who want it change tactics from devoting themselves to the existing tribal celebrity deathmatch, temporary, bitter, pendulum swinging system to an issue-by-issue problem-solving system. Announce problems that need to be solved, not my tribe will solve problems and the other one stands in the way. Then set about solving them. And don't vote for anyone who wants to remain stuck in the old system, as they are paid and supplied with election support specifically to put tribalism ahead of problem solving. Let's start out by talking about whether it's possible to build power for solutions. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez recently declined to pressure Nancy Pelosi for a floor vote on Medicare for all because the quote-unquote left supposedly does not yet have sufficient power to advance that cause. But what if we looked beyond self-identified progressives and leftists for the power we need? Following the model that created public fire departments to replace the homeowner's insurance paid, privately delivered system, the exact same system by which we now provide health care. And what institution is more beloved among liberals and conservatives alike than the fire service? Who would dare run for office on a proposal to privatize firefighting? What if we decided that we do not presume anything to be a left or right wing issue and think of it as just an issue? What if we made it impossible for anyone to accept or dismiss any public affairs discussion on the grounds that it's something their tribe is likely to support or oppose, and catch everyone off guard by completely eliminating the identifying framing? What if we made it impossible for tribal loyalty profiteers to define every issue as a manifestation of broader turf wars? What if self-interested for-profit partisan media and partisan political committees, which make money and get votes on the ratings generated by controversy and conflict, couldn't separate us into enemy camps no matter what topic potentially in the public interest is raised? What if we completely shut down the culture war identity reinforcing system by refusing to use its vocabulary? And by extension, in the social media age, the analytic tools by which conflict is managed for profit. How well could social media oligarchs at Facebook and Twitter control our thinking and actions? And how well could party committees and private election consultants like Cambridge Analytica control election outcomes if we simply removed our participation with it? Could you imagine what might happen if we all agreed just not to use hashtags anymore? To use the old adage on a very, interrelated issue, what if they gave a war and nobody came? What if we made that who we are? Should we still be using terms like right, left, socialist, progressive, Democrat, Republican, American exceptionalism, liberal, and conservative? These are words defining sides, not policies. Why would we lead with that? Why, when coming up with what we think is a good idea and running the math on it, do we first inform people whether or not the idea represents or opposes their side? Why tell people in advance if they're your allies or opponents, assuring your idea of no better than 50% support and passionate, even violent opposition? So let's talk about the history of firefighting. I am a firefighter. I want to preface these remarks by saying it's important to establish these narratives and opinions are my own. They don't represent the opinion of the fire department to which I belong or any other fire department. It's based on my own knowledge of history and my own experience in the fire service. So let's talk about firefighting. If we understand what brought about the smooth transition in the United States and throughout the world from a private insurer-paid, private contractor-provided fire service to a fully publicly provided, universally received system, we may be able to create a successful approach to many of the critical issues that we face that year upon year, election upon election, generation upon generation, defy solution, even as the public budgets intended to provide them keep going up. So what happened? What was wrong with the original firefighting system that, again, as I said, was run exactly the way our contemporary American healthcare system, the last one in the world still operating this way, interestingly enough. The rest of the developed world has long since recognized that the exact same dynamic was in place and came up with ways to mitigate or even fully set aside those issues with public systems, public insurance systems, public delivery system like the British National Health, a variety of systems, any one of which could be viable here in the United States. So you want to start from the position of what was wrong? Why wasn't it working? What made it so easy for people to see and agree that it's not working and that something needed to be changed? Well, essentially, the system was putting out very few fires. That's the bottom line. The reasons why it was putting out very few fires were very easy to see. Before I go into it, I'm gonna tell people it's something, a little exercise, home study exercise I'd like you to do. Go on YouTube and search in the search tool for the opening scene of the movie Gangs of New York by Martin Scorsese. Just type in opening scene Gangs of New York, and you will see depicted on the screen in the opening of this movie, in the establishment of this movie, what one of the major issues were. And I'll tell you what that was, but it's enjoyable to go watch it anyway. I don't want you to think I'm just making this up. But logic will show you, even without the historic lens, that this would happen if we were doing it today. Let's say I have one insurance company that contracts with its preferred vendor, with its preferred provider of fire trucks and firefighters. The person next door to me, they have a different insurance company. They like the deal they got from that insurance company. They exercised that choice. That company has negotiated deals with its own preferred vendors, sends those companies out. My house is on fire. It quickly spreads to your house. Both of our houses are on fire. We call the fire department. We call our insurance company, tell them the fire is happening. My house is under, and they do their jobs perfectly. They call their companies. The companies do their provision of their job perfectly. They immediately leave their fire stations, and their vehicles and staffing arrive at the scene of the fire at the exact same time and park in front of the one fire hydrant. Now what happens? Who gets the fire hydrant? And so, as the opening of that movie depicts, this was a literal thing. This was a major thing in every city, in every municipal water system throughout the country, is that the very first thing that would happen when fire engines arrived at a scene is that the firefighters would jump off the trucks with their tools and they would go at each other. They would fight each other. They would, beat each other senseless, hit each other with sharp implements, wound and kill each other over the first order of business, which is who is going to hook up to the fire hydrant. Okay, let's say the victor of that battle hooks up to the fire hydrant, and it's the one that I contracted. They're going to start applying water to my house, not to yours, pal. That's just how it goes. They're not being paid to put out the fire in your house. When they're not putting out the fire in your house, they're not preventing the fire in your house from spreading to the other adjacent house on the other side of your house. Now we have an even potentially bigger problem on our hands. The people who live in that house, they're not very well off. They couldn't afford fire insurance. Or maybe an alternate scenario. They did a very rational thought process. They looked at how frequently house fires break out, found that it's not very frequent. They were trying to save up for their kids to go to college. They had other uses for the money, whatever it was, just kind of making a logical consumer decision. And they opted not to purchase fire insurance as part of their homeowner's policy. Their house lit on fire, not yours, and they have nobody to call. When you call your fire insurance company and say, hey, I need a truck sent over here, their first question is your house on fire? You say, no, not yet. They say, okay, fine. Call me back when your house is on fire, because we're not under contract to the house that's on fire. And so it's not legal for us to go out and put out their fire. So, hang on the phone, stay right there, stand by. As soon as your house is on fire, you call us, we'll dispatch right away. And then, of course, they dispatch. They don't get to your house till, 6-7 minutes later. And by then, your house is so involved with fire, that all they can do is save your fireplace. All your possessions are gone. Your home is gone. And multiply that going through every building, all the way through the city. Multiply all of that through commercial enterprises, the place where you work. The place that pays property taxes, that pays the salaries of your firefighters, of your cops, of your school district people, of your teachers, of your water system, of everything else that's involved in the smooth delivery of a social contract and the operation of a thriving civilization. None of that can happen when everybody is not on one system of payment, one system of provision that's not dependent on the customer's ability to pay, that's not dependent on the customer simply choosing that rationally they think they can find better uses for the money because the risk is small, not based on multiple providers. There's one set of payments, there's one set of providers, there's one set of water supply, there's universal coverage so that nobody is put at risk when people opt out. And that was seen to be the only way that firefighting could be effectively done. It is the only way that firefighting could be effectively done. The shift from the old system to the modern publicly provided system was swift and worldwide. Any objection came to it was exclusively from the for-profit insurance industry and the for-profit providers of the fire engines and the firefighters themselves. They were very small in number. They were not politically influential. And even if they were, the masses of people and businesses that repeatedly witnessed the fights over the hydrants, the inability to extinguish fires, and the carnage that came along with that easily overcame those objections. Let me pause at this moment for people that are just joining us and remind you that you're listening to a new program called This Is Who We Are. It's coming to you either online or on the radio through the Pacifica Affiliates Network. My name is Steve Greenfield, and I want to welcome you to the program. We were just talking about the the very close parallel between the ending of the for-profit firefighting insurance and firefighting industries in the mid to late 1800s in the United States throughout the world, and the reasons why that was brought about, and the reasons why it was politically acceptable as well as operationally necessary, and the parallels between that and the way that we deliver healthcare in the United States today through a very, very similar privately insured and privately provided under the terms of that insurance system that is similarly ineffective, unable to provide the service in an equitable and universal manner that prevents the spread of disease even to people who are insured. And so we're going to continue with that right now. We're going to talk about that parallel and try to figure out what's the difference between then and now. Why was that transition to public firefighting so swift, so universal, and so relatively smooth and easy compared to the death battle that we see today over the exact same thing when it comes to healthcare, and that does not seem to be alleviated in any way, even by the fact that we are in the midst of a pandemic that has killed over 350,000 of us, is nationwide, and has no regard for whether or not we have insurance, that has no regard to who's providing our health care, and has no regard to whether our health care is coming to us through a private employer, because millions of us have lost the jobs from those employers that provided that insurance, and neither party is so much as offering to attempt to intervene in that. By going to a different system that operates the way firefighting operates, even in the midst of a pandemic that's already taken 350,000 of our lives, had over 22 million cases with symptoms that persist for months, even years, and that even that is not enough to get us past this logjam to an improved system that the rest of the world has long since moved to, leaving us, 38th in the world in our healthcare outcomes in this country. Should be an intolerable condition for anyone who considers themselves a patriot. We should consider ourselves seeking to excel and be at the top in everything we do. Right? That's how we perceive ourselves in the world. So here's what we've got, right? We've got this hybrid system of some public insurance for impoverished or deeply impoverished people, some private insurance for people whose employers can afford it or can afford to purchase it themselves based on ability to pay. It's not even that's not a single system covering everything. We choose options based on how much money we have. Do we choose a high deductible system that's less expensive to purchase because that way we'll use it, kind of like in the fire analogy, only when something catastrophic happens? Of course, the downside there, that means that we have to pay out of pocket for tests. And so we're going to be significantly harmed, possibly even killed by things that could have been treated and cured if they had been discovered soon. But we didn't do that. We will go to work when we're sick instead of staying home. And we will transmit our contagious disease to other people in the workplace or other people in the bus or the subway, however it is we get to work, and cause untold losses of hours at work, of economic activity, turnover in the workplace, and having employers having to retrain new workers from scratch, hire temp workers. So these vast inefficiencies of our system that just persist and persist and persist, and are so many times more expensive than it would cost to create a Canadian style, or just eliminate the age requirement for Medicare, or eliminate the income requirement for Medicaid. However you would skin this cat, however you would go about doing it, the cost of just going ahead and doing that is so much less than the cost of what we're currently doing. Do we get to choose our providers? Even that, no, we don't get to choose who our insurer will be. That's a decision our employer makes based on the presentations that the various salespersons who come from the different insurance companies make, and how that fits in with our employer's business model and revenue streams. Once we've been given that insurer that's not of our own choosing, we don't get to choose our own doctors. I don't know why people talk about that without being immediately interrupted by how false we all know that to be. We don't get to choose our own doctors. We get to choose only from who's in network with our insurance company. right? And then if your employer next year prefers a different insurance company, and that's now going to be your insurance company, you just lost all your doctors. They're not in network with the new company. You may lose them completely. You may be able to somehow keep some of them as long as you pay the additional out of network fee, right? We all know this. The reason that we do not all universally know this, the way we all universally were able to see the burning of city blocks, the fighting over the fire hydrants between the respective private companies that were responding, the people choosing not to be covered at all and or couldn't afford to be covered at all, and how that multiplied outward to people who were covered. That were defenseless against the after effects and side effects of the people who weren't covered. That was so plainly visible, and yet in our times, it's not plainly visible. Every time you try to speak of it, it just sparks greater wrangling, greater death struggle, over our tribal, identities, our political divide that's based on how we view ourselves. And so that's the difference, right? Is that we have a much more firmly established tribal divide, systems of identity, new issues and new characteristics get added every year. 1 year you're fine, you're a Republican or a Democrat, and then the next year you're suddenly a rhino, or a dino, a Republican in name only, because some new issue was assigned to the Republican identity. And it took you a little while on the uptake to get hip to that and to be on top of that and to incorporate it into your own echo chambers and things that you believe. I don't know why everybody falls for that. There's nothing about being a Republican that requires you to be against gay rights. That doesn't make any sense. Republicans used to believe in, low business regulation, low taxation, more independence to conduct business and to conduct private lives. Boy, there's a contradiction in there, right? If you're against the freedom, the equality of different kinds of people based on their race, based on their incomes, based on their religion, based on their sexual preference or gender identity. That's actually the opposite of what conservative people used to believe in. So it's kind of interesting and a whole different thing to go into of how that developed. But if we're going to move forward from where we are and not remain, treading water like we are, like the North going Zacks and the South going Zacks from that Dr. Seuss story, where they refuse to budge from each other in the directions that they're moving, and the entire world literally grows and moves on and builds up around them while they stay permanently face to face, refusing to budge. If we don't want that to be who we are, the first thing we have to do, again, back to the name of this program, this is who we are. We have to acknowledge that this is who we are. You don't call the thing by its name. You don't admit to the actual problem that you have, and you're not moving a step closer towards solving the problem. You're just reinforcing that sense of combat. Both sides do the same, and so neither side advances. And even when either side does, it's just a short time before the other side reacts by strengthening its own position and pushing back and moving the pendulum back to the other side. And so even brief periods of advancement are short-lived and readily reversed. And so we remain in that standoff forever. And so with that, I'll pause again for a second, for a quarter-hour reminder for people who joined in the midst of the conversation. You're listening to a new program. It's called This Is Who We Are. My name is Steve Greenfield. I'm your host. I'll be coming to you weekly through the Pacifica Affiliates Network, your local affiliate, and through other online platforms with this program. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you'll share it with your friends, and I hope you'll come back to hear what we'll be doing on this program for the future. I assure you it will not be monologues. We will be using the approach that I'm trying to establish in today's initial episode to actually identify specific issues where America is trapped and unable to move forward, that don't necessarily need to have a partisan component to them, and can just be viewed from a problem-solving perspective. We'll be doing that on an issue-by-issue basis. I'll have guests. We'll come together. But for today, you're hopefully enjoying the opening episode of This Is Who We Are. And my name is Steve Greenfield, and so on, continuing with the program. So, before going forward with the rest of what I wanted to discuss, and perhaps to contextualize the rest of what I'm going to discuss and the manner in which I'm going to discuss it, I want to deal with what is arguably the single most problematic word that we use in an idealistic belief, and the feeling that we're promoting idealism in using it, and that word is unity. All of our, so-called national leaders over the last week have been calling for unity, that we can't go on like this. We need to have unity. Other people are saying, what? Unify with those SOBs, unify with people like that, unify with, we shouldn't be unifying with people like that. There can be no unity with people like that. The right-wing people are saying there can be no unity with people who are promoting socialism and trying to end the United States as we know it. Deluded as they are in why they believe this, they're saying there can be no unity with people who passively accept interference with elections. And just sit quietly by while nefarious forces overthrow our democracy. On the other side of the aisle, there are people saying there can be no unity with people who behave so aggressively. There can be no unity with people who don't want me to get health care. There can be no unity with people who, think that Barack Obama was born in Africa. There should be. They're not even saying there could be no unity. Both sides are using the same, that are pushing back against this idea of unity, are using the same terminology, that there should be no unity with such people. And when we're saying there should be no unity, what we mean by that is this other thing is so bad, so unacceptable, that we cannot even live with it in a state of détente. It must be defeated. The only mechanism by which we can move forward is by utter defeat of the opposition, and that they must be defeated, not because they're so successful at resisting us, but because they're so terrible as people and as a belief system, that no coexistence with them can be possible, that they must be completely defeated, shut down, driven into the dark fringes of our society. And so surely nobody can be surprised with that being how people view the concept of unity, and what that would mean to pursue it, that we don't achieve it. But to me, there's something about the idea of unity that strikes me as sort of contradictory to the whole idea of a pluralistic society, of people having the liberty to be who they are, to view the world through their own lens, to have their character formed by their own experiences, to develop their own interests. Unity, it's a word. When you really start unpacking what unity would look like, aside from the fact that we can't have it, we shouldn't be discussing, even wasting time discussing it simply because we can't have it. But, like I said, if you really lifted up the hood and looked underneath it at the working parts, it's something that all of us, liberal, conservative, anywhere that we fit, any kind of moral grounding that we have, any kind of household that we were raised in, any kind of income level that was provided to us by the lottery of the circumstances of our particular birth, all about that. Do we even think that unity is desirable? Because I think not. If everybody was like me, all music would sound like garage rock. There'd be no classical, there'd be no country, there'd be no jazz. And that would be insane. I like to take a break from what I do every once in a while and listen to these other very excellent and very rewarding musical forms, as I have throughout my own life. And they could never develop the resources to be performed so well, crafted so well, and expertly, if there weren't large masses of people that considered that to be their preferred form, and not something as a sideline. Like that diversity. The idea of unity disrespects diversity. And the idea of pursuing it confounds the very foundations of diversity. It treats conformity as a social good. It stifles stifles initiative. It stifles creativity. It suffocates intergenerational social evolution. I think we don't even want it. I'm sure that we don't want it. But there is something else. There are other things that we can have that are desirable, that make it possible for all of us to recognize that we all have value. Even people who believe things that we not only don't believe ourselves, but may even believe are harmful. But we can, as everybody in the rest of the world generally does. Not everybody, but most countries in the world generally manage to kind of live with each other. Okay, like I will be with you at this picnic, but I won't be with you at that bowling alley. And that's generally okay. People learn to live together that way. And things are generally more domestically peaceable, more inter-inhabitable, and policy that's productive, like healthcare, like reducing violence, like alleviating poverty, like improving education. Those things all become possible because everybody doesn't just automatically default to trying to determine if some kind of social or economic change is somehow an attempt to undermine their culture, to undermine their belief system, and for somebody else to take power over them and determine the circumstances of their lives in manners that they will not find acceptable. And I think that we're able to do that in this country. I think that most of us, when we're not in the thrall of our preferred media bobbleheads of our respective Rachel Maddow's and Sean Hannity's, kind of reinforcing to us who it is we think we associate with, as opposed to what it is we think we need our country to accomplish to progress policy-wise. When we're not, when we take a step back from that, take brief vacations from that, we do generally tend to agree that we want those kinds of advancements to happen, that we think that's important to how we view ourselves as a nation, as a civilization, as a diverse and pluralistic group of people living together with one geopolitical border with that free trade and mutual defense pact that actually would, if we were to accomplish it, would make that free trade and mutual defense pact so much more valuable to us and operate so much more effectively, as actual trade, as actual defense, not as a global imperial conquest force, not as a drain on our economy the way it is. Boy, there's another issue that I've seen people on, who the media would have you believe are utterly divided, who say, like, yeah, whatever happened to our peace dividend? The Soviet Union's been gone since the early 1990s. And China's we're their biggest consumer market. We're their biggest trading partner. China's not going to attack us. How would they eat if they attack us? And as a result of that, because of a treaty, both we and the entire European Union closed down purchasing from China. So it's not going to happen, right? We're kind of caught up in the thrall of bad messaging systems while we care more about our tribal identities than these things that, when we step back for a moment, we all agree are things that we'd love to see accomplished. So the mechanism by which we can get to that point and finally become something resembling one country, rather than trying to limp along forever in between outbursts of spectacular violence, we can do that. But we can only do it if we want it. And we can only do it if we disengage from the people who profit from us not having it. So that idea, I guess I'm going to call that idea détente. We can call a truce. The World War I was ended by a truce, by a ceasefire, by an armistice, as it was called. November 11th was originally called Armistice Day. The Treaty of Versailles came later, but the war was ended by a ceasefire. The Korean War was ended by a ceasefire that was never replaced by a treaty. That state of war technically still exists. And yet they haven't fought. They haven't fought the entire time since 1953. They have not fought. We have not fought with China We were allies of the respective sides in that war, the United States and China. We have not fought. Quite the contrary. Both the United States and China have done everything in their respective powers to keep North and South Korea at peace with each other and the ceasefire indefinitely in place for as long as possible. The end of the Soviet Union and our ability to engage into trade relations and have the Cold War come to an end began because just as the first outreach to China began under Richard Nixon reached out to the Soviet Union with a program that I'm showing my age here now, having been watching the news in the early 1970s, that was called détente. The first thing that happened is détente. Let's call a truce for a moment. Let's step back from the nuclear brink. Let's look at it that way here in the United States. Let's step back from the brink of what we saw on the steps of the Capitol and inside the Capitol building the other day. Let's step back from the brink of what we're seeing inside the Capitol building right now, which is armed, body armored, M16 toting federal troops occupying the halls of our Capitol building right now, because it's become evident that there are armed people outside the Capitol that may seek to enter upon the Capitol and commit harm at any given moment. That is our domestic version, right, of being on that brink. It's a brink we've been on before. When we had our Civil War, we ended up killing, 2.5% of the population. If that were to unfold again today, in today's population, we're talking about killing, 9, 10, 11 million Americans. It's hard with, the eons that have passed, since then. We look at that number, whatever it is, 800,000 deaths, and it seems terrible on the face of it. And of course it is, but we do not. And that was with the very, very limited weaponry, of the 1860s. Not like today where hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions of people have what can only legitimately be thought of as battlefield weapons that they're specifically purchasing because of what they see as their Second Amendment right to be armed against the potential for tyranny. To be armed in contemporary weapons of war at home. If this were to unfold again, we'd be looking at 10 million deaths, 20, don't let that ever be entirely out of your mind when going through this thought process and understanding the emergency, the urgency of establishing a détente, because that we are genuinely, as we're watching unfold on television every single day, on our internet every single day, that we are in a state of emergency, right? We are in a state of emergency in terms of our civil strife. We're obviously in the middle of a medical emergency. We've been in one for a year already. 350,000 people are dead. We're in an economic emergency that's attached to that. And nobody's using the word emergency, okay? I am, and I think we should all be using the word emergency. How do governors declare a state of emergency? But apparently they're only declaring it because that's a formality that enables them to access federal funding for emergencies. But none of them are addressing their own populations and saying, we're in an emergency, and we're going to all act collectively as if we're in an emergency, like we did in World War II, when people accepted, not universally, but close to universally, accepted their rationing books to make sure that the priority to the war effort could be maintained. While none of us were going to starve, we just had to not overconsume. People who planted their victory gardens so that the products of the industrial farms could go to the war effort. We look back at the last, the economic emergency, the Great Depression, where we collectively decided that we're just going to hire people. The federal public agencies are just going to hire people. Boy, they hired, not just for paving roads, they hired people to be playwrights. They hired people it wasn't just the Tennessee Valley Authority. They hired people for many, many things because there was an emergency. We then transitioned out of that, unfortunately, into war spending, but the point remained the same. The public was hiring people, and those people, once hired, were able to spend, and so the economic emergency was ultimately brought to an end. I'm going to take the quarterly pause in this hour once again at the third quarter mark to remind people who have joined in the middle that you're listening to the very first, the opening broadcast of a new public affairs commentary program called This Is Who We Are. It's not This Is Who We Are. The emphasis is on the word is. This is who we are. My name is Steve Greenfield. You may be listening to me on the Pacifica Affiliates Network. I hope that you are. You may be listening to me on some internet-based platform. I hope that you're going to enjoy what you hear, and if you do, I hope that you're going to share it with your friends, with your media, as far as you can, because honestly, there's all the cynicism out there, and even all the misdirected idealism and its failure to bring us to the goals that we need to accomplish. I am not cynical. I am still idealist. I still believe that we can do this. I just believe that the methods that we're attempting to do this, to get through this, are methods that we have seen be unsuccessful time and time again. One of the definitions in popular parlance about the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and somehow expecting a different result. I think that very much applies to our current times and to a great many number of generations that have led up to the current times, and I think it's time that we turned our attention back to the kind of methods that we have seen be successful in the past, not just all over the world, but right here in America. Systems to bring about change, to bring about social and political harmony. Remember, I'm not using that word unity. It's not achievable, and as I described in the previous quarter, not desirable. For any of us, let alone all of us. You stop and think about the implications of what unity would look like rather than harmony between a very large and diverse and pluralistic society in which diversity is encouraged and celebrated, which is the opposite of unity, but does not need to be a source of strife, can certainly exist in harmony. I'm idealistic about that, and the purpose of this program today and going forward is going to be to try to bring to listeners information about what those approaches would look like, what approaching policy solutions to our persistent problems look like if we could just start out by disentangling it from culture wars, and not think of whether or not people can go to the doctor as something that we either agree with or disagree with based on what political party. That this is just a human understanding. And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And so now, going to the last quarter hour, I'd like to talk about some of the things that we repeatedly do, no matter who we are, no matter what our base ideology is, no matter who our friends are, that we know that we're doing, that you'll see when I use the vocabulary, that you'll see that we're doing, that we probably wish that we weren't doing, that we probably wonder, like, boy, if I could be the first person out on the dance floor not to do this, how long would it take before everyone else got out on the dance floor? That's what I'm doing with this program. I'm going out there on the dance floor and inviting people out to show them this dance can happen. And so I'm going to start talking about now, what do we do that prevents harmony? What do we do as individuals? What do we do as members of our components of the culture, as part of this pluralistic tapestry of the United States? Are there things that we're doing personally and that groups that we support and finance and vote for are doing that are tremendous obstacles, not minor obstacles, but clear and even deliberate obstacles to whether this larger dance can ever be held, and enjoyed by all of us together, and become the new model by which we go forward, rather than the two countries, red and blue, slave and non-slave, liberal and conservative. Whether we can continue on that basis, which I'm sure we all are seeing and processing that we truly can't, and maybe we just are struggling to figure out, is there a way we can get out of it? And of course, if there's a way you can get out of it, what the other people have to stop doing if we're going to get out of it, that's not under your control. Fine if you observe that. Fine if you think about that. But that's not under your control. The things that are under your control are the things that, they're thinking about. What could you do that'll provide that opening to them? Those are the things that are under your control. Those are the things you want to be looking at. What are you doing? What are the people on your side doing? What are the people on your side profiting from? that don't necessarily have to be done. That would then be, the first salvo in this détente. A good faith gesture, as it were. What's in our own backyards that we can clean up, the parts that are under our own control. Because if this sounds like too big of a haul to you, or a fool's errand of some kind, I would suggest to you, in continuing with that fire department analogy that I did, 2 quarters ago, about how we solved the firefighting problem in this country. So the first thing I want to suggest to you, seriously, this is not allegorical in any way. This is serious, literal. Go join your local volunteer fire department. They're desperate for volunteers, the ability to keep doing this without it burdening the taxpayer, with the need for professionals. So we have a critical volunteerism shortage in this country, not just in emergency services, but go out and join your local volunteer fire department. I will guarantee you that you will never use words like deplorable or un-American ever again. And you'll quickly see that we just might be able to do this. And so, with that in mind, let me tell you what I have seen from that perspective by being somebody who's as far outside a bubble as could possibly exist. Look at me, a seemingly left-wing intellectual Jewish New York City, every intellectual, every possible, trait under the sun you would not envision being in a rural volunteer fire department, being accepted as a peer in a rural volunteer fire department, full of, white Christian males in pickup trucks and everything that liberals perceive as the baggage that comes along with that and everything that's attached to it. If you genuinely believe that and feel yourselves unshakable in that belief and have been receiving nothing but messaging from your preferred media about how that's in fact the way that it genuinely is, then, first thing you have to do is just find that few hours a week, get yourself out there and go meet those people. Because I am telling you right now, that once you are out there side to side with your fellow human beings, once you are in a tribe whose mission is to go into danger, but not in a willy-nilly way, not to simply risk lives, but to do it in an informed, calculated way with training and teamwork and equipment designed and engineered and proven to be safe under those kinds of emergency circumstances and to accomplish the mission, to put out the fires, to rescue the people entrapped, to get people the immediate first aid that they need and the ambulance ride to the hospital for what comes next. When you find yourself, boosting somebody up and helping them get into a confined space that's on fire in somebody's attic, I assure you, not only never again will you be able to use a word like deplorable, no matter what else you may disagree with those people out, off scene, outside of the firehouse, I guarantee you that it will never even cross your mind to use that word, because you will know fundamentally in your own heart that it's not true, and that what's really happening is that you're looking at complicated people who have strengths and weaknesses, that have faults, just like we all do, that you do, that I do, but that those weaknesses are not always operative. Sometimes it's the strengths that are operative, and we need to look at everything that way. You'll find yourself, without even stopping to think about it, you'll suddenly find yourself thinking about everyone else exactly that way. Why? Because you're no longer learning everything that you think you know about these other people from your social media echo chambers, from your preferred news network. Is it Fox? Is it MSNBC? Is it CNN? Is it your friends on Facebook who tend to friend you and like what you post because they agree with you, not because they disagree with you, right? I mean, what's the primary source of your information? Are you seeking primary information, or is everything being related to you secondhand through filters that have their own agendas for why they want to filter things that way? Go out and be in the world. So first things first, go out and join your fire department. If you're still listening to me 54 minutes into this broadcast, We've got 4 minutes left, just under 4 minutes left, and as soon as we're done here, uh, go look up how to get in touch with your local volunteer fire department or your local rescue squad, ambulance squad, and ask them how you can fill out an application and come down and be part of it. Because I assure you, this will change, how you approach emergency services will change how you approach everything you think you know about your fellow human beings and how you want to approach compassionate coordination with all of them to get the things that we all need done. Okay. And with that being the case, what's that language all about? We don't still use the word gay to mean happy. It's still in the dictionary defined that way. It was very, very commonplace. That was the standard use of it. But now we don't use it because it's more accepted in a different meaning. It's productive in that meaning, and we no longer use it that way, right? I mean, that's not a problem. We don't use the term making love to mean wooing, which was its historic definition when people were wooing each other. We now have a very specific understanding of what that means, and we never use it in its older fashion. So we can stop using terms that immediately telegraph to the person on the other side of the table that we may be overall something that they're not going to find acceptable to them in some sort of larger sense beyond the one issue that you're trying to lay on the table. They start thinking slippery slope. Okay, if I work with them on Medicare for all, next thing I know, they're going to be trying to defund the police, whatever. The next thing I know, they're going to try to be whatever it's going to turn out to be. They're going to try to close my local military base and destroy my community's economy. Then they're going to try whatever it is. Why would you do that? Why would you start a negotiation or an outreach or an attempt at détente by framing everything that you're choosing to discuss, by making the initial reference point an identification that you may not be an overall negotiating partner for the people that you need to bring into the fold? And so I'm going to, wind down to the conclusion of today's episode by suggesting and re-emphasizing, as I stated earlier, that I think the very first thing that we need to do is to stop using the traditional vocabulary, as productive as it may have been in the past, as productive as using the word gay to mean happy once was, as productive as that terminology once was, as a way of organizing support for work we were doing. Those terms are now archaic. Those terms are now terms of division. Those terms are now terms that remind people that they may not wish to work with you, and before they even start listening to the terms of the issue that you're trying to discuss. And so, winding down to the conclusion of this episode, let's drop terms like left, right, socialist, capitalist, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. Don't use them as commonly as you do. Don't seek that identification before you seek an analytical viewpoint to an issue that you're laying on the table, as we did 140 years ago, 160 years ago on the questions of how to put out fire. Once again, in closing, this is Steve Greenfield coming to you on the Pacifica Affiliates Network, elsewhere on the internet, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.